Welcome back to the channel, everybody. This is LCOBMW. I am Glenn McGowan. It is 2024, and we're going to be talking about what to be looking for if you're in the market to buy a C4 Corvette. These cars range from 84 to 1996. Now that the market has kind of come down a little bit since COVID, the prices of them have come down a lot for decent project cars, and even some of the nicer ones have come down a little bit. So they're still at a really good price. They are great cars because they're a perfect platform for either drifting or even drag racing or just having a fun sports car for a pretty decent price. I've had three now. Behind me is my 1985 Corvette. It's on air ride. They are just kind of fun cars to build and relatively inexpensive to build too. So they are a great platform if you are just kind of new to the Corvette scene. So today we're going to be talking about the exterior differences, what engines came in them, and which transmissions were available, all that kind of little differences and stuff. So if you are going to look for one of these, you'll have a better idea of what you really want out of the car. This week's video is brought to you by LCOBMW.com. Shop our site for Corvette performance parts. We now have our new D.I.Y cat delete pipes back in stock, our new test pipes, and we now have a new version of our hose kit available. This is for 88 to 91. This includes a fitting that you can hook your hose directly up to the hose that's on your car on the firewall. So check out the link in the description or visit LCOBMW.com. Okay, so when we're talking about the exterior of the cars, I'm gonna just break it right down the middle, and we're gonna go early style and late style. So 84 to 1990, it's gonna look like that. It's gonna have that style front bumper. The rear bumpers are the same. It almost kind of kicks in a little bit, which we'll do a walk around real quick here in a second. You're gonna have the black body molding around the whole car. And you're also gonna have your fender panel on the side there, which accesses your battery there. It's going to have two little louvers on it. So in 1991, they changed that. You're going to have different front bumper, different rear bumper. Even the shapes of your taillights in the rear are different. And then that body molding around the whole car is actually paint matched to the car. So at a glimpse, you can tell whether it's an early one or a later one. So we'll do a real quick walk around this so you can see what the early style looks like. So this is the early style front bumper. And as you can see, as we walk around the car, you see the black molding, and then this is what the fender looks like. And this is the rear bumper. And the perfectly round Corvette taillights. Okay, so let's talk about engines. So first year, 1984 Crossfire fuel injection. This is a carryover from the C3 1982 car, and it was 1 year only, and it was 205 horsepower. So it doesn't sound like a lot, and it is not a lot, but coming out of the 70s when like cars were like 160 horsepower, it was probably pretty decent for the time. So that was the only year, 84. Then 85 came and introduced the L98 two-port injection engine. So that was 230 horsepower. Now you're thinking to yourself, that's not that much better, but at the time in 1985, this car was like the fastest car in North America. I think Porsche 928 held it since like 1983 or something like that, and this car came and beat it. And then Porsche bought a bunch of these to figure out why we were beating them. So at the time, it was pretty big deal, but now obviously 230 horsepower is kind of like what a riding mower is. But so this engine went till 1991. So in 1992, they introduced the LT1, which is essentially a 350, and it is 300 horsepower. And they made a version of it, the LT4, which is 330 horsepower, which you can find in your collector series car, and then your Grand Sport Corvette, which is blue, white stripe, and then red sashes on the fender. So those are the engines that you'll commonly find. And the one little rare bird out of those cars is 1990 to 95 is a ZR1. So that is its own monster. It is not a 350. It's its own engine only in the ZR1 Corvette. Okay, so let's talk about the transmissions that you can commonly find in these cars. So we'll get the vegetables out of the way before we eat the meat. We'll talk about the auto transmissions real quick. So 700R4 and then the 4L60. You are gonna find a ton of C4 Corvettes that are automatic. It is not a bad thing. There's just more of them out there, and it is probably more common. You're gonna get a really good price on a car that is automatic because they made so many of them. They are decent transmissions. They all have overdrive. So it's a good, you know, platform to just hop up the engine, drive that around, or just a good daily driver. So the more fun side is the stick shift stuff. So they were trying to be innovative in the early style cars, like this one was. This is a Doug Nash 4+3 transmission. A 7-speed, I guess, but it's essentially I believe a T10 4-speed with extra overdrives on it. I personally never got mine working in my car or care to. I have swapped it to a newer style ZF6 transmission, but I heard when those 4+3s work, they are kind of cool, but unfortunately I never experienced that. But that's what you're gonna find in the early style cars up to 1988. So 84 to 88, if it's a stick shift car, it's a Doug Nash 4+3. Moving on to 1989, they came out with the ZF6 6-speed. ZF is a German company. They make a lot of transmissions for German cars and stuff like that. Pretty decent trans. They had two variations of that. The early one is a black tag, and the later one is a blue tag. This car has a blue tag in it out of a 95 Corvette. The black tags are supposedly stronger, what I've heard, and they're just a little bit louder just the way the gears are cut. I believe they can handle like 400 foot-pounds of torque, something like that, but they're both pretty decent transmissions, so they have a pretty decent reputation, I guess, for the most part. So that's what you're gonna find when those cars are 6 speeds from 1989 to 1996. Black tag, blue tag. Now, as far as the rear differentials are concerned, if you do have a stick shift car, you're gonna have the Dana 44, which is the better, stronger rear differential. So when I was buying my car, that was kind of like in my checklist. I wanted a stick shift car, and then mainly because it had the better rear in it, and then if I didn't use the 4+3, I could always swap it over, which I did down the line. So that's the difference too. So you are gonna have a different rear in the auto car opposed to the stick shift car. Now we'll talk about the interiors of these cars. So 84 to 89 are essentially the same thing. So it's very 80s, the digital sweeping dash, and it's very plain, no airbags or anything like that. And then in 1990, they changed it almost as like a cockpit in a car, which is different. I've been in both, and they feel like they're almost different cars on the inside. So we'll take a look at mine so you can get an idea what the early 1980s flashback looks like. As you can see, basic steering wheel. I don't have the keys in it, but that's what the dash looks like. It's all nice and flat. Got all sorts of fancy pants, little switches and gauges at the time, and then that, what they call, I believe, the bread box, is a cushion to smack your face on if you get into an accident, but there's no airbag behind that. And this is what the seats look like that. I know the later ones have like the controls on the seats, but this is what an earlier style car will look like on the inside. All right, so what I like to go down my little checklist here whenever I'm buying a car, so I'm gonna share with you my process when I'm looking for a car to buy. And especially with these cars too, it's like the early ones have a ton of electrical issues and stuff like that, so you kind of got to keep an eye on what to look for. So the main thing I do, like if you are going to just build like a raw race car, something like that, and you don't really care about the mileage, the history of the car, anything like that, then that doesn't matter. You just get whatever you can find for a decent price. And like I said, there are plenty of them out there for like under $2 grand that you could do complete engine swap or do whatever you wanted to it that are a little ratty and rough. But if you are going to buy one that you want to hold on to for a while and potentially sell it down the line, clean title always. Make sure the thing has not been smashed or anything like that. Make sure the mileage matches up with the title on the car. Do a little Carfax. A lot of the Carfax stuff from like the 80s didn't really carry over, so you really kind of got to go over the whole car to make sure that it hasn't been beaten up. Because these things were driven a lot, there's a lot of them that at least have been in one accident or repainted, because the early paint in those cars were like crap. So, you know, this car was even like resprayed at one point before I just painted it in like the 90s. So it's just kind of like, you gotta kind of go over the whole car, try to get as much information that you can, especially if the old owner has all that information. It's really important. But for me, it's like, this car is 68,000 miles, all the Carfax, all the information, every time the title changed hands, the mileage matched up with that. So to me, it was like, okay, this is kind of cool because it has relatively low miles for the year for a 1985 car. So mileage, you know, is it a clean title? You know, that kind of stuff really matters if you want to hold on to it and ever resell it, because someone wants to buy a car that's like clean, good service history, all that kind of stuff. So that for me is like kind of number one whenever I'm buying a car to hold on to. I don't really like sell them, I buy them to flip them, I just buy them and I kind of keep them for a while. So I don't plan on selling my cars. So to me, it's nice to have something that's kind of nice. So if I ever do want to get it, I will get top dollar for it, hopefully. So that's one thing that I always do. So the next thing I would say is, you know, you want to check the engine performance out on the car. How's it running? Is there a check engine light on? Is it misfiring? You know, you could either do a compression check, all that kind of stuff. If you take the car and you're not mechanically inclined, you could take a car to a shop that you know and have them go over it, do a compression test, cylinder leak down test to tell you that the engine's in good operation. A lot of times people will hop these things up, beat the crap out of them, so you don't really know what you're looking for. So doing tests like that can actually save you a lot in the future to make sure the thing is running 100%. As far as transmissions are concerned, starting with the automatics, so if they're slipping, you can feel that while you're driving, if there's no reverse, stuff like that. Relatively simple to diagnose. Just from driving the car, you'll kind of feel if it's doing what it's supposed to. So they're pretty much straightforward when it comes to like if the thing has a problem or not. Just drive it and you'll be able to feel it right away for the most part. And if you have questions about that, talk to somebody like at a trans shop or something like that. They may be familiar with that. But just drive the car and see what it's doing, and you know, pretty much go from there. But the automatic ones are they're pretty solid unless someone beat the crap at it or neutral banged it or something like that. 4-speed cars, the 4+3s, they're known to hop out of second gear. My car did that all the time. The minute like you're on it in second, took your foot off, and pop right out. The ton of issues with the overdrive system, the 3 extra gears or whatever, they had a lot of problems. So they're kind of, you know, somewhat problematic. I know people are really kind of into them, and I see a lot of people are actually putting them, you know, repairing them and getting them back in the car to keep them original. So there are just a couple things to look for with those. The ZF6, they're pretty decent, like I was saying earlier, but you know, same thing. Does it grind going into gear? Are the synchros bad in it? Check to see if the clutch is good in it, if it's slipping when you're trying to drive the car. Just little things like that, just to keep an eye on when you're test driving the car. It could tell you a lot. So they're just simple things to look for. Just be kind of really aware of every gear that it goes into and make sure it has all the gears. Go up on the highway, go all the way up into 6th gear and make sure they're all there and they're not making noise in any of the gears, stuff like that too. Kind of simple, but worth checking out. Okay, so the other thing would be like any kind of frame rust, collision damage. This is when you got to get underneath the thing and check. Make sure there's no rotted out areas. Check your brake lines, make sure they're not rotted out really bad. All your suspension mounting points, making sure nothing's pulling away. So you pretty much got to go underneath the car, take a little measuring tape, measure, you know, from the bottom of the ground up to each point, make sure the car's on a level surface. But a lot of times you can kind of tell. I mean, if the car looks like the bumper is kind of shifted on there, probably smacked in the front, so something could be out of whack. So follow the body gaps in the car, make sure the door's shut right, the hood's shut right, so everything kind of lines up the way it should. If it doesn't, get underneath it, check for any kind of collision damage. A lot of stuff can be replaced, like suspension components and stuff like that can be replaced if they're damaged, but go over it, make sure there's nothing really bad, like one of the frame rails isn't like kicked up in the back or something like that. So it can't hurt just to get underneath the thing and make sure you're not missing out on anything. So the next thing would be suspension and steering. If you're getting a car that's from the 80s, pretty much if the bushings have not been done in the car, they all need to be done. Ball joints, probably the same thing. I mean, you can check to see if there's play in them and they're probably fine. I've been driving around in my car with like the factory bushings in the front for a while now, and which need to be replaced, but it's one of those things where, you know, because the cars are so old, the rubber breaks down through time, and usually it all has to be replaced. I got pretty much everything done in the rear of the car, but I have to move on to the front. Unless someone has taken really good care of the car and replaced those along the way, that's a really good check, you know, off your list if someone has been maintaining the car like that. But if you get a car that's been sitting for a long time, all that stuff's probably gonna have to be replaced. Leaky power steering lines, you know, the bushings on the rack, tie rods, stuff like that. Usually it's like a safety inspection like that if you are in, like, I'm in PA, so every year you gotta get your car inspected. So, you know, there are things that people look for. So, you know, bushings, ball joints, all that kind of wear items, you gotta go over and make sure that they're decent as well. So other than that, that's just a normal kind of safety inspection item. Now, as far as interior stuff is, like I was saying earlier, the early cars, the electricals, headlights not working, the digital dash not working, the power seat's not working. These are all common things with the early model cars. So check all that stuff out. If you go and you really want to buy a car and you go in there and none of the interior lights are on and nothing works on the inside, I don't know, maybe run from that, because you're gonna be chasing that demon for a while, or you're gonna have to run on new wires and stuff like that. So I know a lot of this stuff, like the gauges, there's companies you can send them out to, and you can get all the replacement parts to rebuild the gauges and stuff like that, which is kind of nice. But check to make sure everything works before you buy the car, because it'll really help. I mean, unless it's, you know, a project car you don't really care about, then it doesn't really matter if that stuff works anyway and you can replace it. But like I said, the early stuff you really got to keep an eye on because it's really iffy. But the later stuff, as far as I know, it's pretty decent. I know headlight motors are, you know, kind of a normal thing to go. But as far as the interior electrical and stuff like that, you want to just make sure seats, dash, everything lights up and works. All right, so just a couple C4 problems. So headlight motors, like I mentioned, all the weather strips in these cars, unless they're recently done, are all going to be shot. LT1 cars, OptiSpark issues, water pumps leaking on the OptiSparks. Not the end of the world, but they're just kind of like problems of the time. So little stuff like that to look out for. Other than that, they're pretty decent cars. Like, for the age and the problems they have, they're very reliable. They're not like one of those cars that have so many like known issues that you want to steer clear from them. They're pretty basic and straightforward. So besides those couple little issues, there is a ton of information on these cars. There's a ton of aftermarket support for, you know, headlight motors and aftermarket components to fix this, and, you know, all sorts of forums that have, you know, all the little problems kind of worked out at this point, which is kind of nice when you have an older car that has a really big fan following like the C4 or Corvettes do in general. So all in all, those are the things to look for when you are buying one of these cars. So you can spend anywhere from $1,000 to, you know, $20,000 on a really nice, essentially basically a C4. I don't know the value of the ZR1s right now. There are, you know, substantially more, but there's your ranges of prices. So $1,000 for like a beater that, you know, you're gonna build into a race car, which is awesome. Or you could spend a little bit more and get a nicer one, a low mile one, stuff like that, because there are plenty of them out there. I was doing research on Facebook Marketplace before I made this video, just kind of seeing what the prices were, because a couple years ago everything was like really stupid high, and I was like, that's kind of bizarre. And I knew they were going to go up in value because a lot of like the younger generation are getting into them, they're drifting them now, and all sorts of young builders are building these, wide bodying them, Rusted and Busted, my boy Jay, all sorts of people are building really cool versions of these cars because they are such great platforms. Okay, so comment down below if there's anything that I missed or you think that's very important to mention. I try to kind of summarize everything in a nutshell. So if there's anything that you think is really important, throw in the comments so anybody who's watching this can look through it and be like, oh, okay, that's a great point, and help them get the car that they want. So if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. Thanks for watching.